The blood-soaked handkerchief. Katherine Owens clutched to her lips, told the story her failing voice could not consumption, was stealing her breath away with each passing day in the unforgiving Colorado territory of 1878. As the stagecoach hit another rut in the road, she stifled another cough and gazed out at the vast landscape stretched before her, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake coming west. The doctor in Boston had given her 6 months at most. Fresh air, he'd said with a dismissive wave, perhaps the mountain climate. It was the best he could offer, but Katherine had seized upon it like a drowning woman clutching at driftwood. She'd sold nearly everything she owned, packed what little remained, and purchased a one-way ticket west. Now, 3 weeks into her journey, she wondered if she'd even survive to reach her destination. Next stop, Willow Creek. The driver called down, his voice barely audible over the rumbling wheels and the pounding of hooves. Katherine straightened her skirts and tucked the handkerchief into her sleeve. Willow Creek wasn't her final destination. That was still another 2 days' journey to Silver Ridge, but they would stop there overnight. One night in a real bed would do her good before the final leg of her journey. The stagecoach slowed as they approached the small settlement. Willow Creek wasn't much to look at, a main street lined with wooden buildings, most weathered to a dull gray. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small hotel, and a smattering of other businesses made up the heart of the town. As the stage rolled to a stop, Katherine gathered her small travel case and waited for the driver to open the door. When he did, she was met with the curious stares of 3 men lounging outside the saloon across the way. She kept her eyes downcast, focusing on negotiating the steps without stumbling. "Need a hand, madam?" the driver asked, offering his arm. "Thank you," Katherine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Even those 2 words sent a burning sensation through her chest. She accepted his help, her legs unsteady after the long hours of confinement. "Hotel's just there," the driver said, pointing to a 2-story building with a sign reading Willow Creek Inn. He handed her the small traveling case she'd kept with her. "Rest of your luggage will be brought over shortly." Katherine nodded her thanks and made her way toward the inn, feeling the weight of eyes upon her back. A young woman traveling alone always drew attention, especially in these remote parts. But Katherine had nothing to fear from gossip. She'd be gone tomorrow, and it hardly mattered what anyone thought of a dying woman. The innkeeper, a plump woman with kind eyes, showed her to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Supper's at 6, she informed Katherine. "Dining room's downstairs." Left alone, Katherine sank onto the bed, another coughing fit seizing her. This one was worse than the others, leaving her gasping for breath, spots dancing before her eyes. When it finally subsided, she lay back on the bed, too exhausted to even remove her traveling clothes. Sleep claimed her almost instantly. She awoke to darkness, disoriented and parched. A glance at the small clock on the bedside table told her it was just past midnight. She'd slept through supper entirely. Her stomach growled in protest, but it was her desperate thirst that drove her to rise. Surely there would be water available downstairs. The inn was quiet as Katherine made her way down the stairs, grateful for the moonlight streaming through the windows that guided her way. The dining room was dark and empty, but she spotted a water pitcher on a sideboard. As she reached for it, another coughing fit seized her, this one so violent she had to brace herself against the wall. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as she struggled to draw breath. Panic rose within her as her lungs seemed to seize. She was going to die here, alone in the dark of this strange place. The thought brought a surge of fear unlike anything she'd experienced before. Katherine stumbled toward the front door, desperate for air. Outside, the night air was cool, but it did little to ease her distress. She sank to her knees on the boardwalk, her body racked with coughs that produced more blood than the last. Her vision narrowed to pinpoints of light against an expanding darkness. Miss, are you all right?" The voice seemed to come from far away. Katherine tried to look up but couldn't manage it. Rough hands, gentled by concern, touched her shoulders. "You can't breathe," the voice observed, calm but urgent. "Here, let me help you." Strong arms lifted her, cradling her against a broad chest. The scent of leather, horses, and something uniquely masculine filled her nostrils. I'm dying," Katherine managed between gasps. The man holding her didn't hesitate. "Then I'll be your breath," he said with quiet determination. "Just hold on to me." His voice was a deep rumble, steady and sure. Katherine felt herself being carried, her head lolling against the stranger's shoulder. She wanted to protest a lady didn't allow herself to be carried through town by a stranger, but she lacked the strength to do more than cling to the front of his shirt. "Doc," the man called out, his voice reverberating through his chest against her ear. "Doc Jenkins, wake up. Got an emergency." The next few minutes passed in a blur of motion and voices. Katherine was aware of being placed on something soft, of lamplight suddenly flooding her vision, of unfamiliar hands touching her face and chest. "Consumption, from the looks of it," an older voice said. "Bad case, too." "How long's she been like this?" "Don't know. Found her collapsed outside the inn." "Well, she needs proper care and quick. Help me get some steam going." Katherine's eyes fluttered open to find herself in what appeared to be a doctor's office, a middle-aged man with spectacles leaning over her. Beside him stood her rescuer, a tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair, and the most intensely blue eyes she'd ever seen. "There you are," the doctor said kindly. "I'm Dr. Jenkins. Can you tell me your name?" "Katherine," she whispered. "Katherine Owens." "Well, Miss Owens, you're having quite the spell. Are you traveling through?" She nodded weakly. "To Silver Ridge." The doctor and the younger man exchanged glances. "Silver Ridge is a good 2 days from here," the doctor said carefully. "In your condition." "I have to go," Katherine insisted, another cough punctuating her words. "I've sold everything. Have nowhere else." The young man stepped closer, his expression troubled. "I'm Samuel Jenkins," he said, and Katherine realized with a start that he must be the doctor's son. "The doctor's right, you're in no condition to travel further right now." Katherine closed her eyes, despair washing over her. She had barely enough money to establish herself in Silver Ridge, where she'd secured a position as a schoolteacher, assuming she lived long enough to begin. She couldn't afford an extended stay in Willow Creek. "You need rest and proper treatment," Dr. Jenkins continued. "Steam treatments, fresh air, good food." "A few weeks might." "I don't have a few weeks," Katherine interrupted, both because she knew her funds wouldn't last and because she doubted her lungs would give her that much time. Samuel Jenkins studied her face, his blue eyes thoughtful. "What's waiting for you in Silver Ridge?" "A teaching position," Katherine whispered. "The only one I could secure that didn't ask too many questions about my health." Dr. Jenkins sighed. "Miss Owens, I don't think you understand the gravity of your condition. You very nearly suffocated tonight." "I understand perfectly," Katherine replied, summoning what dignity she could while lying prone on an examination table. "I have consumption. I'm dying. But I intend to live what time I have left on my own terms." A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "Spirited," he commented to his father. "That's good. Fighters live longer." Dr. Jenkins shook his head. "She needs care, Sam, not a stagecoach ride through mountain passes." Samuel was quiet for a moment, his gaze never leaving Katherine's face. "What if I took her?" he finally asked. "On horseback we could take it slow, stop when she needs rest. I know trails that are gentler than the main road." "Absolutely not," Dr. Jenkins objected. "It's too dangerous for the lady." "More dangerous than staying here until her money runs out," Samuel countered. "Or trying to make the journey alone when she's weaker." Katherine pushed herself up on her elbows, ignoring the doctor's attempts to make her lie back. "You would do that?" she asked Samuel. "Take me to Silver Ridge." Samuel nodded, a lock of dark hair falling across his forehead. "I make supply runs to the mining camps up that way sometimes. Silver Ridge isn't much out of my way." It wasn't strictly true. Silver Ridge was a good 30 miles beyond Samuel's usual route, but something about the determination in Katherine's eyes made him want to help her. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of men who'd lost limbs or suffered terrible injuries but refused to give up. It was rare, especially in someone so clearly ill. "I can pay you," Katherine offered. Samuel shook his head. "We can discuss that later. For now, you need to rest. We can leave in a few days once you're stronger." "Tomorrow," Katherine insisted. "Please, I've already paid for my stage passage." "You're not getting on any stage," Dr. Jenkins said firmly. "And my son isn't taking you anywhere until I say you're stable enough." Samuel laid a hand on his father's shoulder. 2 days, he said, looking at Katherine. 2 days of rest, steam treatments, and good food. Then we'll go if you're well enough to sit a horse." Katherine wanted to argue but lacked the strength. Besides, she recognized the stubborn set of Samuel's jaw. This was as much compromise as she was likely to get. 2 days, she agreed, sinking back onto the examination table. The next morning found Katherine installed in a small room at the back of Dr. Jenkins' house, which also served as his medical practice. The room was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a small table, and a window overlooking a garden that was just beginning to show signs of spring. A knock at the door roused her from a fitful sleep. "May I come in?" Samuel's deep voice called. "Yes," Katherine answered, hastily smoothing her hair and adjusting the borrowed nightgown Dr. Jenkins' housekeeper had provided. Samuel entered carrying a tray with a steaming pot, a cup, and a small bowl. "Brought you some breakfast," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "And some of my father's herbal tea. It tastes awful, but it helps with the coughing." "Thank you," Katherine said, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. In the light of day, she could see Samuel more clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. His hands were calloused, not like a doctor's hands, but like those of a man accustomed to hard work. "You're not a doctor like your father," she observed as he poured the tea. Samuel smiled. "No, madam, I raise horses, have a small ranch just outside of town." He handed her the cup. "Drink this while it's hot." Katherine took a sip and grimaced at the bitter taste. "You were right about the flavor." "Always am," he replied with a grin that transformed his serious face. "But you should see what it does for horses with respiratory troubles. Works wonders." "Are you comparing me to a horse, Mr. Jenkins?" Katherine asked, raising an eyebrow. Samuel laughed, a rich sound that warmed the room. "No, madam. Just saying if it can help a 1,000-pound animal breathe easier, it might do a bit of good for you too." Katherine took another sip, determined to finish the foul-tasting brew. "Why are you helping me?" she asked after a moment. Samuel's smile faded, replaced by an expression she couldn't quite read. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to be determined to reach a destination, no matter what stands in your way." Before she could ask what he meant, Dr. Jenkins entered the room carrying his medical bag. "How's our patient this morning?" he asked, setting his bag on the table. "Stubborn," Samuel replied with a wink at Katherine. "Reminds me of someone else I know." Dr. Jenkins harumphed as he began his examination, Must be why you two get along. Now, Miss Owens, let's have a listen to those lungs. The examination was brief but thorough. Katherine endured it stoically, though she couldn't help but notice Samuel watching from the doorway, his expression concerned. Better than last night, but still quite compromised, Dr. Jenkins announced. Steam treatments twice today and plenty of rest. No excitement, no exertion. Yes, doctor, Katherine agreed meekly. After Dr. Jenkins left, Samuel lingered. I'll bring the steam set up in a bit, he said. And maybe later, if you're feeling up to it, you could sit in the garden for some fresh air. I'd like that, Katherine replied. True to his word, Samuel returned an hour later with a contraption involving a kettle, some tubes, and a tent-like apparatus that he set up over her bed. It looks ridiculous, Katherine commented as he worked. Most effective things do, Samuel replied with another of those transformative smiles. My father's been using this setup for years, learned it from an army doctor during the war. Were you in the war? Katherine asked, trying to calculate his age. Samuel shook his head. Too young. Pa was, though, Confederate Army surgeon. He added water and some herbs to the kettle, then lit a small burner beneath it. I was just a boy, but I remember when he came back. Changed man. Steam began to rise, filling the tent around Katherine with warm, fragrant air. It smelled of eucalyptus and something else she couldn't identify. Breathe as deeply as you can, Samuel instructed, adjusting the apparatus. It'll help loosen things up. Katherine did as she was told, finding that the steam did indeed make breathing a little easier. What changed him? She asked, returning to their conversation. Samuel's expression sobered. War changes everyone, I reckon. But for Pa, it was seeing so much death, so much suffering. Made him determined to save everyone he could after that. He paused. That's why he's so set against you traveling. He doesn't want to lose another patient. I'm already lost, Katherine said quietly. The doctor in Boston made that clear. Boston doctors don't know everything, Samuel replied with unexpected vehemence. I've seen people recover from consumption before. Not many, but some. Usually the ones with the most fight in them. His intense blue eyes met hers. And you, Miss Owens, strike me as a fighter. Katherine wanted to believe him, but hope was a dangerous thing for someone in her position. She'd made her peace with dying, or thought she had, until last night's terrifying episode. Even if I am, she said carefully, some fights can't be won. Samuel adjusted the steam apparatus, his movements deliberate. Maybe not, but they can be fought with dignity. That's what you're doing, isn't it? Going to Silver Ridge to die on your own terms. The blunt assessment startled Katherine, but she appreciated his honesty. Yes, she admitted. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. I have no family left, no close friends. At least in Silver Ridge I can be useful as long as possible. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Well, I respect that, but I want you to know something, Miss Owens. What's that? You're not alone anymore. Not as long as I'm around. The simple declaration, spoken without drama or artifice, brought unexpected tears to Katherine's eyes. She looked away, embarrassed by the emotion. You don't even know me, she whispered. I know enough, Samuel replied. I know you're brave and determined. I know you're facing the hardest thing anyone can face with grace. And I know that if our situations were reversed, you'd do the same for me. Katherine wasn't so sure about that last part. She'd never been particularly heroic, but she was touched by his confidence in her character. Thank you, she said simply. Samuel checked the steam apparatus one last time. This will run for about 20 minutes. I'll be back to check on you, but pull that cord if you need anything sooner. He indicated a bell rope hanging beside the bed. And Miss Owens? Yes, try to rest. Fighting is important, but so is knowing when to gather your strength. With that, he left her alone with the steaming tent and her thoughts. The 2 days of enforced rest passed more quickly than Katherine expected. Between steam treatments, visits from Dr. Jenkins, and meals brought by the housekeeper, she found herself actually regaining a small measure of strength. The terrible coughing fits still came, especially at night, but they seemed less frequent and less severe. Samuel visited regularly, sometimes just to check on her, other times bringing small gifts, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a jar of honey for her tea, wildflowers from the prairie in a small glass vase. In the afternoons, when the spring air was warmest, he helped her to a bench in the garden where she could sit in the sunshine. It was during one of these garden visits, on the afternoon of the second day, that Katherine first heard the story of how Samuel had come to Willow Creek. "I was heading to California," he told her as they sat side by side on the weathered bench. "Had big dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields." "What happened?" Katherine asked, wrapped in a quilt against the slight breeze. Samuel stretched his long legs out before him. "Ran out of money in Denver. Took odd jobs, saved up, headed out again. Then my horse went lame near here. Found work at the livery stable while she healed, and," he shrugged, "somehow never left. You just stayed." Katherine found this hard to understand. "What about California?" "California's still there," Samuel replied with a small smile. "But I found something here I wasn't expecting." "What was that?" "Purpose." He gestured toward a small pasture visible beyond the garden fence where several horses grazed. "Started breeding horses, found I had a knack for it. Then the army came through, looking for mounts. Got a contract to supply cavalry horses. One thing led to another, and now I've got a decent operation." Katherine studied his profile, strong and clean against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains in the distance. "Do you ever regret not continuing to California?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "I think some journeys are meant to end before you reach the destination you had in mind. Sometimes the real destination finds you instead." There was wisdom in his words that Katherine hadn't expected. This cowboy-turned-horse breeder had depths that intrigued her. Despite her determination not to form attachments, what was the point, when her future was so limited? She found herself drawn to Samuel Jenkins in a way that both comforted and unsettled her. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked, changing the subject. Katherine nodded. "Dr. Jenkins says I'm well enough to travel, though he still objects to the journey." "Pa objects to most of my decisions," Samuel said with a chuckle. "Been that way since I was 15 and decided I wanted to break horses instead of mend people." He turned to face her directly. "It's a 3-day ride to Silver Ridge, taking it slow. We'll stay at waypoints, I know. It won't be as comfortable as a proper hotel, but I'm not concerned about comfort," Katherine interrupted. "I just want to reach my destination before." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Samuel's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "You'll get there," he promised. "I'll make sure of it." The touch of his hand sent an unexpected flutter through Katherine's chest that had nothing to do with her illness. She withdrew her hand, flustered. "I should rest before supper," she said, rising from the bench. Samuel stood immediately, offering his arm for support. "Of course. Big day tomorrow." As they walked slowly back to the house, Katherine couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. Not about going to Silver Ridge, that decision was made, but about allowing Samuel Jenkins to accompany her. He'd already shown more kindness than she deserved. What right did she have to involve him further in her doomed journey? But when morning came, and she saw him waiting with 2 saddled horses, one his own sturdy gelding, the other a gentle-looking mare, Katherine's doubts faded before the reality of his steadfast presence. Dr. Jenkins fussed over her until the last moment, pressing packets of herbs and medicines into her hands. "Steam treatments every night," he instructed. "And the tonic twice daily. Don't overexert yourself." "I'll take good care of her, Pa," Samuel assured him, securing Catherine's small trunk to a pack horse. "See that you do," Dr. Jenkins replied gruffly, though his eyes betrayed his concern. "And you take care of yourself too, son." The old doctor turned to Catherine, his expression softening. "Godspeed, Miss Owens. I hope you find what you're looking for in Silver Ridge." Catherine thanked him warmly for his care, surprised by the emotion that welled up at the thought of leaving this man who had treated her with such kindness. In just 2 days, both he and Samuel had shown her more genuine concern than she'd experienced in years. With final goodbyes said, Samuel helped Catherine mount the mare, adjusting the stirrups to fit her height. "Rosie's as steady as they come," he assured her. "She'll give you a smooth ride." The first hour of their journey passed in relative comfort. Catherine found the mare's gait easy to adjust to, and Samuel kept their pace deliberately slow. They followed a well-established trail leading west from Willow Creek, the morning sun warm on their backs. "How are you holding up?" Samuel asked as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. "Better than I expected," Catherine admitted. "The fresh air feels good." Samuel studied her face. "Your color's better today, that's promising." Catherine didn't have the heart to tell him that the flush in her cheeks was likely fever, not health. Instead, she accepted the canteen he offered, taking small sips of the cool water. "Tell me about Silver Ridge," Samuel said as they resumed their journey. "What's waiting for you there?" "A teaching position," Catherine replied. "The town is growing rapidly because of the silver mines. They need teachers for the miners' children." "And they hired you without meeting you." Catherine shifted uncomfortably in the saddle. "I may have been less than forthcoming about my health in my correspondence with the town council." Samuel raised an eyebrow but didn't comment directly. "How long have you been teaching?" "5 years," Catherine replied, "in a girls' school in Boston." "Why leave? Before you got sick, I mean." Catherine hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal, but there was something about the open sky above them and the vast landscape around them that made secrets seem pointless. "My fiancé died," she said finally. "Typhoid fever. We taught at the same school. Afterward, I couldn't bear to stay there with all the memories." She took a breath that caught painfully in her chest. "Then I began coughing. By the time I saw a doctor, the consumption was well established." "I'm sorry," Samuel said quietly, "about your fiancé and about your illness." Catherine nodded, accepting his sympathy. "Life takes unexpected turns." "That it does," Samuel agreed, his own expression suggesting he had personal experience with such turns. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on the packed earth. Catherine found herself studying Samuel's profile against the backdrop of the mountains ahead. He sat his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle, his broad shoulders relaxed but alert to their surroundings. By midday, Catherine was flagging, though she tried to hide it. The exertion of riding, minimal though it was, had taken more out of her than she'd anticipated. A persistent cough had begun to trouble her, and she pressed her handkerchief to her lips frequently. Samuel, ever watchful, noticed her distress. "Time to rest," he announced, guiding them toward a stand of cottonwood trees near another small stream. "This is a good spot." Catherine didn't argue, grateful for the respite. Samuel helped her dismount, his strong hands spanning her waist and lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. The momentary contact left her flustered, unused as she was to such intimate assistance. "Thank you," she murmured, steadying herself against the mare as a wave of dizziness passed over her. Samuel frowned at her pallor but didn't comment directly. Instead, he spread a blanket in the shade and helped her settle upon it. "Rest here while I see to the horses," he instructed. "Then we'll have some food." Katherine leaned back against the trunk of a cottonwood, closing her eyes as another coughing spell seized her. When it passed, she opened her eyes to find Samuel watching her with concern, a canteen in his extended hand. "Drink," he urged. "Small sips." She obeyed, the water soothing her raw throat. "I'm all right," she assured him, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Samuel sat beside her on the blanket, unpacking bread, cheese, and dried apples from his saddlebag. "Eat something," he encouraged, offering her a piece of the bread. "You need to keep up your strength." Katherine accepted the food, though she had little appetite. "How much farther today?" she asked, taking a small bite. "Another 4 hours, maybe 5, Samuel replied. "There's a line shack belonging to the Bar T Ranch where we can spend the night. It's basic, but it'll keep us out of the weather." Katherine nodded, relieved they wouldn't be sleeping under the stars. Though the day was warm, the spring nights in the mountains could be bitterly cold. "Tell me more about your ranch," she said, hoping conversation would distract her from her discomfort. Samuel's eyes lit up at the question. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads," he admitted. "About 300 acres, most of it good grazing land. I've got 28 horses right now, including 6 new foals." Pride was evident in his voice. "Breeding stock, mostly. I specialize in horses with both endurance and temperament, good for cavalry mounts or long-distance travel." "It sounds wonderful," Katherine said sincerely. "You must love it." "I do," Samuel confirmed. "There's something about working with horses. They're honest creatures, no pretense, no deception, just pure spirit." "Unlike people," Katherine observed. Samuel chuckled. "Some people are like that too, honest, straightforward." His blue eyes met hers. "Like you." Katherine looked away, uncomfortable with the compliment. "You hardly know me." "I'm a good judge of character," Samuel replied easily. "Have to be in my line of work. Can tell a lot about a person by how they handle themselves when things get rough." He took a bite of cheese. "And you, Miss Owens, handle yourself with grace under pressure." Katherine wasn't sure how to respond to that. She'd never thought of herself as particularly graceful, especially now, when her body betrayed her at every turn. Before she could formulate a reply, Samuel rose to his feet. "We should get moving if we want to reach the line shack before dark," he said, offering her a hand up. "How are you feeling? Can you ride a bit longer?" Katherine nodded, determined not to slow their progress. "I'm fine," she insisted, ignoring the stabbing pain in her chest. Samuel looked skeptical but didn't argue. He helped her back onto Rosie, his touch gentle but impersonal this time. Katherine told herself she was relieved rather than disappointed by the change. The afternoon's journey was harder than the morning's had been. The trail began to climb, winding its way through increasingly rugged terrain. Katherine focused on staying upright in the saddle, each breath a conscious effort against the tightness in her lungs. Samuel rode close beside her, occasionally reaching over to steady her when she swayed. His vigilance was both comforting and slightly embarrassing. Katherine had always prided herself on her independence, and being so obviously in need of assistance chafed at her pride. "Not much farther now," Samuel assured her as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. "See that ridge ahead? The line shack's just beyond it." Katherine nodded, too exhausted to speak. The last hour had been a blur of pain and determination. Her world narrowed to the next breath, the next hoofbeat, the next bend in the trail. When they finally reached the small cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, Katherine was near collapse. Samuel dismounted quickly and came to her side. "Easy now," he murmured, lifting her down from the saddle. This time, he didn't set her on her feet but continued holding her, cradled against his chest. "I've got you." Katherine wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but the truth was she wasn't sure she could. Instead, she let her head rest against his shoulder as he carried her into the cabin. The interior was simple but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Samuel laid her gently on the cot. "Rest here while I take care of the horses," he said, covering her with a blanket from his saddlebag. "I'll be quick." Katherine closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of Samuel moving around outside, the jingle of harness, the soft nicker of horses, his deep voice murmuring reassurances to the animals. Despite her exhaustion and discomfort, she felt oddly at peace. There was something comforting about Samuel's capable presence, his matter-of-fact care. True to his word, Samuel returned quickly. He built a fire in the fireplace with practiced efficiency, filling the cabin with warm light and the comforting smell of wood smoke. "Now for that steam treatment," he said, setting a pot of water to heat on the fire. "And some of Pa's tea." Katherine pushed herself up on one elbow. "You don't have to nurse me," she protested weakly. Samuel gave her a look that brooked no argument. "I promised my father I'd take care of you," he said. "Besides, you need it after today's ride." He was right, of course. Katherine's chest felt as if it were bound with iron bands, each breath a struggle against their constriction. She watched as Samuel prepared the steam treatment, setting up a makeshift tent similar to the one his father had used. "Sit up a bit more," he instructed, helping her into a semi-reclined position. He positioned the steaming apparatus over her, creating a pocket of warm, moist air. "Breathe as deeply as you can." Katherine obeyed, feeling the warm vapor begin to ease the tightness in her lungs. Samuel sat beside her on the edge of the cot, his presence reassuring. "Thank you," she whispered between breaths, "for all of this." Samuel shook his head. "No need for thanks. Anyone would do the same." "No," Katherine disagreed. "They wouldn't. Most people would have left me to fend for myself." Samuel was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe I understand better than most what it's like to need help and not want to ask for it," he finally said. "I was pretty low when I first came to Willow Creek. Broke, horse lame, nowhere to go. Mr. Thompson, he owned the livery stable, took me in, gave me work, helped me get back on my feet. He adjusted the steam apparatus. Taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's just part of being human." There was wisdom in his words that resonated with Katherine. All her life, she'd prided herself on her self-sufficiency. Even when engaged, she'd maintained a certain independence, never fully allowing herself to lean on her fiancé. Now, faced with her own mortality, she was learning that true strength sometimes meant accepting support from others. "Still," she said softly, "what you're doing goes beyond common decency. Taking 3 days away from your ranch, risking your own health to help a stranger, it's extraordinary." Samuel's eyes met hers, startlingly blue in the firelight. "Maybe you're worth extraordinary measures, Katherine Owens." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with her illness. For a breathless moment, something charged and unspoken hung between them. Then Samuel cleared his throat and stood, breaking the tension. "You should eat something," he said, moving to his saddlebags. "I've got jerky and hardtack, not much of a meal, but it'll keep our strength up." Katherine nodded, grateful for the change of subject. The intensity of the moment had unsettled her, reminding her of feelings she'd thought buried with her fiancé. Feelings she had no business experiencing now, with her future so uncertain. They ate a simple meal in companionable silence, the crackling fire and occasional whicker of the horses outside the only sounds. Afterward, Samuel prepared his father's herbal tea, grimacing as he handed her a cup. Still tastes awful, he warned, but it'll help you sleep. Katherine sipped the bitter brew, making a face at the flavor. It's growing on me, she lied, making Samuel laugh. You're a terrible liar, Miss Owens, he observed, his eyes crinkling at the corners, but I appreciate the effort. As night fell fully, Samuel made his own bed on the floor near the fire, using his saddle as a pillow and his coat as a blanket. Katherine watched him from the cot, feeling a mixture of guilt and gratitude. You should take the cot, she offered. I've imposed enough. Samuel shook his head firmly. Ma raised me better than that, he said. I've slept on worse than this floor many a time. He settled onto his makeshift bed. Get some rest. We've got another long day tomorrow. Katherine wanted to protest further but lacked the energy. The combination of the day's exertion, the steam treatment, and the herbal tea was pulling her toward sleep despite her discomfort. Good night, Samuel, she murmured, her eyes already closing. Good night, Katherine, came the soft reply. Call out if you need anything in the night. She slept better than she had in months. The combination of physical exhaustion and the soothing effects of the treatment granting her a respite from the coughing that usually plagued her nights. When she woke, early morning light was filtering through the cabin's single window and Samuel was already up, tending the fire. Morning, he greeted her, looking up from the flames. How are you feeling? Katherine took a careful breath, assessing. Better, she said, surprised to find it was true. The iron bands around her chest seemed to have loosened slightly overnight. The treatment helped. Samuel nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. We'll do another before we leave. He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot heating on the fire. Black as sin and strong enough to float a horseshoe, he warned as he handed it to her. Katherine took a cautious sip and nearly choked on the powerful brew. Goodness, she gasped. Is this coffee or tar? Samuel laughed, the sound warming the small cabin. Trail coffee, he explained. Gets the job done. He sobered slightly. Long day ahead. We need to cover more ground than yesterday if we want to reach Miller's station by nightfall. Katherine set her jaw determinedly. I can manage. Samuel studied her face, his blue eyes serious. I know you can, but you don't have to push yourself to the breaking point. We can take it slow, stop when you need to. And if we don't reach this Miller's station, then we camp under the stars, Samuel replied with a shrug. It wouldn't be the first time. Katherine wasn't thrilled by the prospect but appreciated his flexibility. I'll try not to delay us, she promised. After another steam treatment and a breakfast of jerky and hardtack, they set out once more. The second day's journey took them higher into the mountains, the trail narrowing as it wound through pine forests and across small, rushing streams. The air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of pine resin and wildflowers. Katherine found that she did indeed feel stronger than the previous day. The treatments were helping, as was Samuel's careful attention to her needs, ensuring she drank frequently, stopping for rest whenever her breathing became labored, adjusting their pace to match her endurance. As they rode, Samuel pointed out features of the landscape, sharing stories of previous journeys through these mountains. He had an easy way of talking that put Katherine at ease, his deep voice rising and falling with the rhythm of their horses' hooves. By midday, Katherine was tiring but determined not to show it. When they stopped to rest in a small mountain meadow dotted with early spring wildflowers, she made a conscious effort to appear stronger than she felt. Beautiful, isn't it? Samuel commented as he spread their now familiar blanket under a towering pine. This time of year, before the summer heat, the mountains are at their best. Katherine nodded, taking in the panoramic view of snow-capped peaks against the clear blue sky. I've never seen anything like it, she admitted. Boston has its charms, but this. She gestured at the vast landscape, This makes one feel very small. In a good way, though, Samuel suggested, settling beside her. Reminds us that our troubles, however large they seem, are just a small part of something much bigger. Katherine considered this, finding unexpected comfort in the thought. Perhaps her illness, her impending death, things that had consumed her thoughts for months, were indeed small in the grand scheme of the universe. Not insignificant, but perhaps not the entirety of her story either. "Have you always been so philosophical, Mr. Jenkins?" she asked, accepting the bread and cheese he offered. Samuel smiled, a hint of self-deprecation in his expression. "Comes from spending too much time alone in these mountains," he replied. "A man starts thinking too much. Or perhaps just enough," Katherine countered. Their eyes met, and again Katherine felt that curious connection between them, a recognition that went beyond their brief acquaintance. It both thrilled and terrified her, the possibility of a deeper attachment when her future was so uncertain. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Samuel glanced at the sky, his expression turning concerned as he noted the dark clouds building over the western peaks. "Storm's coming," he observed. "We should get moving if we want to reach Miller's station before it hits." They packed up quickly, Samuel helping Katherine back onto her horse with the same careful attention he'd shown from the beginning. As they resumed their journey, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain. The trail grew steeper, winding its way through a narrow pass between towering rock formations. Katherine focused on maintaining her seat as Rosie picked her way carefully along the path, grateful for the mare's sure-footedness. Samuel rode just ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was managing. The storm clouds continued to build, casting an ominous shadow over the landscape. The first fat droplets of rain began to fall as they crested a ridge, the wind now strong enough to whip Katherine's skirts around her legs. "There it is," Samuel called over the rising wind, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the valley below. "Miller's station. We'll make it before the worst hits." Katherine squinted through the increasing rain, relief washing over her at the sight of their destination. The station appeared to be a small trading post with several outbuildings, situated at the junction of their current trail and what looked like a wider road heading west. They urged their horses to a faster pace, the animals sensing the approaching storm and needing little encouragement. The rain intensified, soaking through Katherine's traveling cloak and dress within minutes. By the time they reached the station yard, she was drenched and shivering. Samuel dismounted quickly, coming to help her down. As his hands spanned her waist, he frowned at her trembling form. "You're freezing," he observed, concern evident in his voice. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms once more, carrying her toward the main building as the storm broke in earnest around them. The trading post's interior was warm and smoky, lit by oil lamps that cast a yellow glow over the crowded space. Several men sat around a pot-bellied stove, playing cards and smoking pipes. They looked up as Samuel entered with Katherine in his arms, curiosity evident in their weather-beaten faces. A broad-shouldered man with a thick gray beard stepped forward. "Sam Jenkins," he greeted, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Been a while." "Miller," Samuel nodded. "Need a room for the night. The lady's not well." Miller's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in Katherine's pale face and wet clothes. "Looks like you both need drying out," he observed. "Got one room left back of the building." "Emma," he called over his shoulder. "Visitors need attention." A plump woman with kind eyes emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Goodness," she exclaimed, taking in the situation. "Bring her this way, young man. Poor thing's soaked to the bone." Samuel followed Emma through the trading post to a narrow hallway at the rear. She opened a door to reveal a small but clean room with a double bed, a washstand, and a small fireplace already laid with kindling. "Get her settled," Emma instructed. "I'll fetch some dry clothes and hot bricks for the bed." Samuel gently set Katherine on the edge of the bed. Her teeth were chattering now, her lips tinged slightly blue. "I'll get the fire going," he said, moving to the hearth. Within minutes, the kindling caught, filling the room with welcome warmth. Emma returned with an armful of clothing and several cloth-wrapped bricks radiating heat. "These are my daughters," she explained, setting the clothes beside Katherine. "She's away visiting her sister, won't mind you borrowing them." She turned to Samuel. "Now you, young man, out while the lady changes. Come back to the main room, Miller's got dry clothes for you too." Samuel hesitated, glancing at Katherine. "Will you be all right?" he asked quietly. Katherine managed a nod despite her shivering. "Go," she urged. "I'll be fine with Mrs. Miller," the woman supplied. "Emma Miller, and don't you worry, I'll take good care of her." Samuel left reluctantly, closing the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, Emma helped Katherine out of her wet clothes, clucking sympathetically at the younger woman's thinness and the obvious signs of her illness. Consumption. She asked directly as she helped Katherine into a dry flannel nightgown. Katherine nodded, too exhausted to dissemble. Emma's expression softened with compassion. "My sister had it," she said, helping Katherine into the bed and tucking the hot bricks around her. "Nasty business. But you've got a good man looking after you." "He's not." Katherine began, then stopped, unsure how to define Samuel's role in her life. "We're traveling companions," she finally said. "He's helping me reach Silver Ridge." Emma gave her a knowing look but didn't comment further. "Rest now," she said, stoking the fire. "I'll bring you some hot broth shortly. Best thing for a chill." Left alone, Katherine sank into the bed's surprising comfort, the hot bricks gradually warming her chilled body. She hadn't realized how cold she'd become during the final stretch of their journey, too focused on simply remaining upright in the saddle. A knock at the door roused her from a light doze. "Come in," she called, her voice hoarse. The door opened to reveal Samuel, now dry and wearing borrowed clothes that were slightly too large for his frame. He carried a tray with 2 steaming bowls. "Mrs. Miller sent supper," he explained, setting the tray on a small table near the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Warmer," Katherine replied truthfully, "though I think the rain may have been a setback." Samuel's brow furrowed with concern. "I'm sorry. I should have checked the weather more carefully before we set out this morning." "Nonsense," Katherine said firmly. "You couldn't have known." She gestured to the chair beside the bed. "Please sit. You must be tired too." Samuel settled into the chair, passing her one of the bowls of stew. "Eat," he encouraged. "Mrs. Miller's cooking is legendary in these parts." The stew was indeed delicious, rich with chunks of venison, carrots, and potatoes in a savory broth. Katherine managed several spoonfuls before her appetite waned, but even that small amount seemed to strengthen her. "I spoke with Miller while you were resting," Samuel said as they ate. "The storm's expected to pass by morning, but the trails will be muddy. He says the road to Silver Ridge is in decent condition, though wide enough for wagons." Katherine nodded, relief washing over her. "How much farther?" "1 more day," Samuel replied. "We should reach Silver Ridge by late afternoon tomorrow, assuming the weather cooperates." 1 more day. Katherine felt a curious mixture of anticipation and regret at the thought. She was eager to reach her destination, to settle into the teaching position she'd secured. But she also felt a surprising reluctance to end her journey with Samuel. "What will you do after you've delivered me to Silver Ridge?" she asked, setting aside her half-finished bowl. Samuel shrugged. "Head back to the ranch," he said. "I've got horses that need attention, contracts to fulfill." He paused, studying her face. "But I'll check on you whenever I'm in the area." The promise warmed Katherine more than she cared to admit. "You've already done more than enough," she said. "I couldn't ask for more." "You didn't ask," Samuel pointed out. "I offered." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and once again, Katherine felt that inexplicable connection, stronger now after their days of travel together. She looked away first, unnerved by the intensity of her own response. "You should rest," Samuel said after a moment, rising from his chair. "I'll sleep in the main room with the other travelers." Katherine frowned. "There's no need for that. The bed is large enough for both of us." As soon as the words left her mouth, she realized how forward they sounded. "I mean," Samuel's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement. "I know what you mean," he assured her, "but it wouldn't be proper." "Proper," Katherine echoed, a hint of impatience creeping into her voice. "I'm a dying woman, Mr. Jenkins. I think we can dispense with some proprieties." The blunt statement sobered Samuel instantly, his expression turning serious. "You're not dying tonight," he said firmly, "and as long as you're alive, you deserve to be treated with respect." The simple declaration touched Katherine deeply. Throughout her illness, she'd felt increasingly defined by her condition, as if her identity as a woman had been subsumed by her identity as a patient. Samuel's insistence on maintaining proper boundaries, even in these unusual circumstances, affirmed her dignity in a way few others had. "Thank you," she said softly. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Get some sleep," he said, collecting their dishes. "I'll see you in the morning." After he left, Katherine lay awake for some time, listening to the rain pattering against the window and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. Her thoughts were a confused jumble of emotions: gratitude for Samuel's steadfast care, anticipation of reaching Silver Ridge, and an unexpected sadness at the thought of parting ways with the man who had become, in just a few short days, someone she cared for deeply. It was foolish, she knew. Even if her health weren't an issue, their lives were set on different paths. Samuel had his ranch, his horses, his established life in Willow Creek. She was heading to Silver Ridge to teach for whatever time she had left. There was no future in the feeling stirring within her heart. Yet as sleep finally claimed her, it was Samuel's face she saw, his deep voice that echoed in her dreams. Morning brought clearing skies and a noticeable improvement in Katherine's condition. The night's rest in a proper bed, combined with the warmth and nourishment, had restored some of her strength. When Samuel knocked on her door shortly after dawn, she was already dressed in her now dry traveling clothes, her hair neatly arranged. "You look better," Samuel observed, genuine pleasure in his voice. "How do you feel?" "Ready to complete our journey," Katherine replied with a smile, "though I must thank Mrs. Miller for her hospitality." "Already taken care of," Samuel assured her. "I've settled our bill and seen to the horses. They're fed and saddled, ready when you are." They breakfasted with the Millers and the few remaining overnight guests, a pair of miners headed to the camps near Silver Ridge and a traveling salesman bound for Denver. The conversation was lively, focused mainly on trail conditions and news from the surrounding settlements. "Heard there's been some trouble in Silver Ridge," one of the miners commented as he sopped up egg yolk with a piece of bread. "Some dispute between the mine owners and the town council about taxes." "Nothing serious," his companion added quickly, perhaps noticing Katherine's concerned expression. "Just politics. Town's still growing fast. Good place for business. And for a school, Mrs. Miller added warmly, patting Katherine's hand. "Children need education, especially in these frontier towns. You'll be doing important work there, my dear." Katherine thanked her, touched by the woman's encouragement. Despite their brief acquaintance, Emma Miller had treated her with motherly kindness that Katherine, long orphaned, found deeply comforting. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Miller pressed a package of food into Samuel's hands. "For the journey," she insisted. "Fresh bread, cheese, and some of my dried apple tarts." The sky outside was clear, the storm having moved eastward overnight. The air felt washed clean, scented with pine and wet earth. Though the ground was muddy, as Miller had predicted, the main road showed signs of drying already under the morning sun. Samuel helped Katherine mount Rosie, his hands steady at her waist. "Last day," he said, his expression unreadable. "How do you feel about that?" "Grateful," Katherine replied honestly, "to have made it this far and to have had you as a guide." Samuel nodded, something flickering in his blue eyes that Katherine couldn't quite interpret. "Let's get you to Silver Ridge," he said, mounting his own horse. They set off at an easy pace, the road now wider and better maintained than the mountain trails they'd followed previously. Though muddy in places, it presented far less challenge than their route of the past 2 days. Katherine found herself enjoying the journey despite her physical discomfort, aware that this would be her last day traveling with Samuel. The landscape gradually changed as they descended from the higher elevations, the dense pine forests giving way to more open terrain with scattered stands of aspen and scrub oak. In the distance, Katherine could see the distinctive silhouettes of mining operations headframes rising against the sky, evidence of the industry that had given Silver Ridge its name and purpose. "Almost there," Samuel commented as they paused to rest the horses at midday. "Another 3 hours, I'd guess," Katherine nodded, a curious reluctance settling over her despite her eagerness to reach their destination. "I can't thank you enough," she said suddenly, "for everything you've done." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. "No thanks needed," he finally said. "It's been my privilege." They continued their journey in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the afternoon wore on, Katherine found herself memorizing details of their travels, the particular cadence of Samuel's voice when he spoke to his horse, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the steadiness of his presence beside her on the trail. It was foolishness, she knew. Samuel Jenkins would soon be just another memory, albeit a cherished one. She had no right to hold on to him, to want more than the kindness he'd already shown her. The first buildings of Silver Ridge came into view as the sun began its westward descent. The town was larger than Willow Creek, sprawling across a wide valley with the namesake ridge rising behind it. Mining operations dotted the hillsides, while the town proper consisted of several streets lined with substantial wooden buildings, many adorned with false fronts proclaiming their businesses. "Quite a place," Samuel observed as they approached. "Bigger than I expected." Katherine nodded, taking in what would be her new home for however long she had left. Despite its frontier location, Silver Ridge showed signs of prosperity and permanence: a church with a small steeple, a 2-story schoolhouse, several commercial establishments, and numerous residences ranging from simple cabins to more substantial houses. "The school board president is expecting me," she said, pulling a letter from her reticule. "Mr. Hargrove at the Silver Ridge Hotel." Samuel guided them down the main street, past curious onlookers who paused in their activities to observe the newcomers. Katherine felt suddenly self-conscious about her travel-worn appearance and obvious ill health. What would Mr. Hargrove think when he saw her? Would he regret hiring a teacher who might not survive the school term? The Silver Ridge Hotel was an impressive 3-story structure with a wide veranda wrapping around its front. As they drew up before it, Samuel dismounted and came to help Katherine down from her horse. Her legs trembled as they took her weight, partly from exhaustion and partly from nervousness about what lay ahead. "Steady," Samuel murmured, his arm firm around her waist. "Take a moment." Katherine nodded gratefully, leaning against him until she felt capable of standing on her own. "I'm ready," she said after a deep breath that ended in a slight cough. They entered the hotel lobby together, Katherine's hand resting lightly on Samuel's arm for support. The interior was surprisingly elegant for a frontier establishment: polished wood floors, comfortable-looking furniture, and even a small chandelier hanging from the high ceiling. A clerk behind the front desk looked up as they approached. "Can I help you?" he asked, his gaze curious. "I'm Katherine Owens," she replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'm here to see Mr. Hargrove. I believe he's expecting me." Recognition dawned on the clerk's face. "The new teacher. Yes, Mr. Hargrove mentioned you'd be arriving today." He glanced at a large clock on the wall. "He's usually in his office at the mine until 5 o'clock. Should be here within the hour." "Thank you," Katherine said, relief washing over her. She turned to Samuel. "It seems we have a bit of a wait." "That's fine," Samuel replied. "Gives you a chance to rest before meeting him." The clerk cleared his throat. "Miss Owens, your accommodations have been arranged at Mrs. Pendleton's boarding house just down the street. Mr. Hargrove left instructions that you were to be taken there upon arrival." He glanced at Samuel. "And for your companion, Mr. Jenkins has escorted me from Willow Creek," Katherine explained. "He'll need accommodations for the night before returning tomorrow." "We have rooms available," the clerk assured them. "Shall I arrange for your luggage to be taken to Mrs. Pendleton's, Miss Owens?" Katherine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the finality of it all. This was really happening. She had reached Silver Ridge. Her journey with Samuel was ending, and her new life, however brief it might be, was beginning. "Perhaps some refreshment while you wait," the clerk suggested. "The dining room is open, or I could have tea brought to the parlor." "Tea in the parlor would be lovely," Katherine replied, her Boston upbringing asserting itself in the face of uncertainty. The hotel's parlor was a comfortable room off the main lobby, furnished with several settees and armchairs arranged in conversational groupings. Katherine sank gratefully onto a settee, removing her hat and gloves with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion. Samuel took a seat across from her, his large frame looking somewhat out of place amidst the parlor's genteel furnishings. For a moment they sat in silence, the reality of their journey's end hanging between them. "So," Samuel finally said, his voice deliberately light, "Silver Ridge. What do you think of your new home?" Katherine glanced toward the window, which afforded a view of the busy Main Street. "It seems prosperous," she replied. "Larger than I expected." "Good signs," Samuel observed. "Means there'll be plenty of children for your school." Katherine nodded, a flutter of anticipation mingling with her fatigue. "Yes, I'm looking forward to meeting them." A maid arrived with a tea tray, setting it on the low table between them. As Katherine poured, she was conscious of Samuel watching her, his blue eyes intent in a way that made her heart beat a little faster despite her exhaustion. "What will you tell Mr. Hargrove?" Samuel asked quietly after the maid had departed. "About your health?" The question gave Katherine pause. She had deliberately omitted any mention of her illness in her correspondence with the school board, fearing they would not hire a teacher with consumption. Now, face to face with the reality of her deception, she felt a twinge of guilt. "I don't know," she admitted, setting down her teacup. "The truth, I suppose, though not immediately. I'd like a chance to prove myself first, to show that I can fulfill my duties despite my condition." Samuel nodded, understanding in his expression. "You're stronger than you know," he said simply. "These past days have proven that." Before Katherine could respond, the parlor door opened to admit a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s, his dark suit and neatly trimmed beard marking him as someone of importance. "Miss Owens," he inquired, approaching with an extended hand. "I'm Edward Hargrove. Welcome to Silver Ridge." Katherine rose, smoothing her skirts nervously. "Mr. Hargrove, thank you for meeting me. Not at all. We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." His gaze shifted to Samuel, who had also risen. "And you are?" "Samuel Jenkins," Samuel replied, extending his hand. "I escorted Miss Owens from Willow Creek." Mr. Hargrove shook his hand, a question in his eyes. "I see. That was most kind of you, Mr. Jenkins." "It was necessary," Samuel stated simply. "The journey was difficult in places." Mr. Hargrove turned back to Katherine, his keen eyes taking in her pallor and the evidence of exhaustion in her face. "I can see you've had a trying journey, Miss Owens. Perhaps we should postpone our discussion of your duties until tomorrow, when you've had a chance to rest." "That would be most appreciated," Katherine replied with genuine gratitude. "Excellent. I'll have someone escort you to Mrs. Pendleton's boarding house. She's expecting you, has a room all prepared." He glanced again at Samuel. "And you, Mr. Jenkins, will you be staying in Silver Ridge?" "Just for the night," Samuel replied. "I need to get back to my ranch in Willow Creek." Something in his tone caught Katherine's attention, a flatness, a resignation that hadn't been there before. She felt a corresponding hollowness in her own chest that had nothing to do with her illness. Mr. Hargrove nodded. "Of course. Well, I'll leave you to finish your tea while I arrange for transportation to the boarding house." He turned to Katherine with a smile. "I'll call on you tomorrow morning, Miss Owens, to introduce you to the school and your duties there." After he departed, silence fell between Katherine and Samuel once more, heavier than before. Katherine found herself searching for words to express the tumult of emotions within her: gratitude, sadness, and something deeper that she dared not name. "Samuel," she began hesitantly. "I want to—" "Don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't thank me again. I told you it's been my privilege." Katherine studied his face, so familiar now after their days of travel together. "What will you do," she asked softly, "when you return to Willow Creek?" Samuel shrugged, his gaze meeting hers directly. "What I've always done. Raise horses, make supply runs, live my life." He paused. "But it won't be the same." The simple admission hung between them, laden with meaning. Katherine felt tears pricking at the back of her eyes but refused to let them fall. What right had she to cry over a separation that was inevitable from the beginning? "I'll write to you," she promised. "Let you know how I'm faring." Samuel's expression softened. "I'd like that, Mr. Hargrove returned before either could say more, announcing that a carriage was waiting to take Katherine to the boarding house. The moment for deeper conversation had passed, leaving Katherine with a sense of words unspoken, feelings unacknowledged. The transition to Mrs. Pendleton's boarding house passed in a blur of introductions and arrangements. Katherine's new landlady was a brisk, efficient widow who showed her to a comfortable room on the second floor, explaining house rules and meal times with military precision. Samuel helped bring up her trunk, setting it carefully at the foot of the bed. In the small, private space, they faced each other one last time, both acutely aware that their journey together had reached its end. "Katherine," Samuel began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "I know," she said softly, saving him from having to articulate the complex emotions evident in his eyes. "Me too." Samuel reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, the simple touch more intimate than any words could have been. "Take care of yourself," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "The treatments keep doing them, and if you need anything at all, send word to me in Willow Creek." Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She squeezed his hand once, then let go, stepping back to create distance between them. It was better this way, a clean break, no false promises, no pretense that they had any future together. "Goodbye, Samuel," she whispered. He held her gaze for one more moment, his blue eyes memorizing her face. "Goodbye, Katherine," he replied, then turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Only when she heard the front door close below did Katherine allow the tears to come, silent drops falling onto the bedspread as she sat alone in her new room, in her new life, her heart aching with a loss she had no right to feel. The first weeks in Silver Ridge passed in a whirlwind of activity that left Katherine little time to dwell on Samuel's absence. Mr. Hargrove had introduced her to the school, a well-built two-room building with large windows that flooded the space with light, and to her 27 pupils, ranging in age from 6 to 15. The children, a mix of miners' offspring and the sons and daughters of Silver Ridge's merchants and professionals, had accepted their new teacher with a combination of curiosity and cautious respect. Katherine found that teaching absorbed her completely, the familiar routine providing comfort in her new surroundings. She had been honest with Mr. Hargrove about her health on their second meeting, unable to maintain the deception face to face. To her surprise, he had not dismissed her outright, though concern had furrowed his brow deeply. "I appreciate your honesty, Miss Owens," he had said after a long silence, "and I admire your determination to continue working despite your condition." He had studied her thoughtfully. "Let us proceed thus. You will teach as long as you are able. When if your health deteriorates to the point that you cannot fulfill your duties, we will revisit the arrangement." It was more than Katherine had hoped for, and she threw herself into her work with renewed dedication, determined to prove herself worthy of the chance she'd been given. The steam treatments Samuel had taught her, combined with the mountain air that the Boston doctor had recommended, seemed to be holding her illness at bay for the moment. She wrote to Samuel after her first week in Silver Ridge, a long letter detailing her new home, her pupils, and her cautious optimism about her health. The letter took 3 weeks to receive a reply, delivered by a freight driver who made regular runs between Silver Ridge and Willow Creek. Samuel's response was shorter than her letter but warmly personal, asking specific questions about her students and expressing genuine pleasure at the news that her health was stable. He included a small packet of the herbs his father used in the steam treatments, with careful instructions for their use. Katherine treasured the letter, reading it multiple times before carefully storing it in her small writing desk. Over the following months, their correspondence continued irregular due to the vagaries of frontier mail delivery, but meaningful to both. Summer arrived, bringing with it warmer days and the end of the school term. Katherine had managed to complete the full term despite several episodes of weakness and coughing that had forced her to cancel classes for a few days. Her reputation in Silver Ridge had grown from the new teacher to Miss Owens, respected for both her educational abilities and her quiet courage in the face of her illness. With school closed for the summer months, Katherine found herself with time to explore Silver Ridge more thoroughly. The town continued to grow, new buildings appearing almost weekly as the mines prospered and more settlers arrived. She made friends among the townspeople, particularly with Emily Warren, the young wife of the general store owner, who invited Katherine to weekly sewing circles and made sure she was included in town events. It was at one such event, a 4th of July celebration in the town square, that Katherine experienced a severe relapse. The day had been warm, the festivities lively, with food, music, and speeches from town dignitaries. Katherine had been enjoying the celebration from a shaded bench when a coughing fit seized her, worse than any she'd experienced in weeks. Emily Warren had been at her side immediately, supporting her as blood-flecked, spittle-stained Katherine's handkerchief. Other townspeople gathered around, concern evident in their faces as Katherine struggled to regain her breath. "Get the doctor," someone called, and Katherine was vaguely aware of running footsteps, of being helped to her feet, of being half carried to Dr. Patterson's office just off the main square. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness, aware sometimes of Dr. Patterson's concerned face, of Emily's gentle hands applying cool cloths to her forehead, of voices discussing her condition in hushed tones just beyond her hearing. When she finally regained full awareness, night had fallen. She lay on a cot in the doctor's back room, a single lamp burning low on a nearby table. Emily Warren dozed in a chair beside her, her young face creased with worry even in sleep. Katherine's slight movement woke Emily, who straightened immediately. "Oh, Katherine," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Weak," Katherine admitted, her voice a hoarse whisper. "What happened?" Emily took her hand, squeezing gently. "You had a bad spell. Dr. Patterson says your lungs are struggling." She hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "He's concerned, Katherine. Says you should consider stopping your teaching, at least for now." Katherine closed her eyes, despair washing over her. She had known this day would come, had prepared herself for it intellectually, but the reality was still devastating. Teaching gave her purpose, a reason to fight the encroaching darkness of her illness. Without it, what was left? "I need to write to Samuel," she said suddenly, opening her eyes. "Can you bring me paper and a pen?" Emily looked startled by the request but nodded. "Of course. Who is Samuel?" "A friend," Katherine replied simply. "From Willow Creek. He'll want to know." The letter she wrote that night was painfully honest. She told Samuel of her collapse, of Dr. Patterson's grim assessment, of her fear that she would not be strong enough to resume teaching when the fall term began. And in a moment of vulnerability that she might have censored had she been less exhausted, she confessed how much she missed his steady presence, his unwavering support during their journey. Emily promised to post the letter with the next freight driver headed toward Willow Creek. Katherine returned to her room at Mrs. Pendleton's boarding house the following day, under strict orders from Dr. Patterson to rest completely for at least a week. 3 days later, Katherine was sitting in a chair by her window, watching the bustling street below, when Mrs. Pendleton knocked at her door. "Miss Owens, there's someone here to see you." Katherine turned, expecting to find Emily or perhaps Mr. Hargrove come to discuss her teaching position. Instead, the doorway framed a figure she had thought about every day for the past 3 months. Samuel Jenkins stood there, hat in hand, his blue eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that took her breath away. He looked travel-worn, dusty from the trail, but otherwise exactly as she remembered him. "Samuel," she whispered, her heart suddenly racing. "How?" "Got your letter yesterday," he said, his deep voice sending a shiver of recognition through her. "Rode straight here." Katherine was stunned. "But it's nearly a 2-day journey." Samuel's lips quirked in a slight smile. "I didn't stop much, Mrs. Pendleton cleared her throat from somewhere in the hallway. "I'll bring up some refreshments," she announced, her tone making it clear she disapproved of male visitors in her female boarders' rooms, but was making an exception given the circumstances. Samuel stepped fully into the room, his tall frame seeming to fill the small space. Katherine was acutely aware of how she must look thin, pale, her hair hastily arranged, wearing a simple wrapper over her nightgown. You shouldn't have come, she said, even as her heart contradicted the words. I didn't expect I had to, Samuel interrupted, moving closer to kneel beside her chair. When I read your letter. He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. How are you truly? Katherine met his gaze directly. Not well, she admitted. Doctor Patterson says the consumption is advancing. He doesn't think I'll be able to teach in the fall. Samuel's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping along its line. What treatment has he prescribed? Rest. Laudanum for the pain. Katherine's lips twisted in a bitter smile. The usual useless remedies. No steam treatments. No herbal teas. Katherine shook her head. Dr. Patterson doesn't hold with such things. Says they're folk remedies with no scientific basis. Samuel muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like profanity. My father's been treating consumption for 30 years, he said more clearly. Those folk remedies have helped many patients live longer, better lives. It doesn't matter, Katherine said softly. Even with the treatments, we both know I'm not going to recover. Samuel took her hand, his calloused fingers engulfing hers. Maybe not, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. But you can have more time, Katherine, better days, and you don't have to face them alone. The implication of his words hung between them, charged with meaning. Before Katherine could respond, Mrs. Pendleton returned with a tray of tea and sandwiches, her disapproving sniff making it clear that Samuel's presence in the room was a temporary concession only. 20 minutes, Mr. Jenkins, she said firmly. Miss Owens needs her rest. After she left, Samuel rose from his kneeling position to sit in the chair opposite Katherine's. He accepted the cup of tea she poured with murmured thanks, though his eyes never left her face. I've been thinking about you, he said without preamble. Every day since I left you here. Katherine's hands trembled slightly as she set down her own cup. I've thought of you too, she admitted. Your letters have meant a great deal to me. Samuel leaned forward, his expression intense. Katherine, I didn't come just because your letter worried me. I came because I couldn't stay away any longer. Katherine's heart beat painfully against her ribs. Samuel, you mustn't, she whispered. I'm dying. We both know that. I have nothing to offer you but grief. That's not true, Samuel countered, his voice low and urgent. You have yourself. Your heart. Your time, however much remains. He reached for her hand again. I'm not afraid of grief, Katherine. I'm only afraid of never telling you how I feel, of letting you face this alone when I want nothing more than to be by your side. Tears filled Katherine's eyes, spilling over to track down her pale cheeks. It's not fair to you, she protested weakly. Life isn't fair, Samuel replied with a hint of his old wry humor. If it were, you wouldn't be ill, and I wouldn't have fallen in love with a woman who's trying her damnedest to die with dignity instead of letting someone love her through it. The blunt declaration stunned Katherine into momentary silence. Love. He had said love. The word hung between them, impossible and wonderful all at once. You can't love me, she finally managed. You barely know me. Samuel's expression softened. I know enough, he said, echoing his words from months ago. I know you're brave and determined. I know you face each day with grace despite your pain. I know that when I'm with you, I'm a better version of myself. His thumb traced gentle patterns on her palm. And I know that if our situations were reversed, you'd do the same for me. Katherine couldn't argue with the truth she saw in his eyes. In the months since their journey together, her thoughts had returned to Samuel countless times, his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he had made her feel valued and whole despite her illness. I care for you too, she admitted softly. More than I should. But Samuel, what future could we possibly have? A few months, a year at most. It would only end in heartbreak for you. Everything ends, Katherine, Samuel replied. The only question is whether we embrace what happiness we can find in the meantime." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions today. Just know that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere unless you send me away." Before Katherine could respond, Mrs. Pendleton appeared in the doorway once more. "Time's up, Mr. Jenkins," she announced. "Miss Owens needs her rest." Samuel rose reluctantly. "I've taken rooms at the Silver Ridge Hotel," he told Katherine. "I'll call on you tomorrow if that's acceptable." Katherine nodded, still overwhelmed by his declaration. "Yes," she whispered. "Please do." After Samuel left, Katherine sat by the window for a long time, her thoughts in turmoil. His unexpected arrival, his declaration of love, it was everything her heart had secretly yearned for, and everything her practical mind had warned against. To love and be loved in return was a gift she had thought forever beyond her reach, once her diagnosis was confirmed. Her fiancé's death had taught her the pain of loss. Her own illness had convinced her she had no right to inflict such pain on another. Yet Samuel had come, riding day and night to reach her side when he learned of her relapse. He had offered his heart freely, knowing full well the cost. Could she refuse such a gift? Did she even want to? The following morning, Katherine woke feeling stronger than she had in days. Whether it was Samuel's arrival or simply a temporary respite in her illness, she didn't know, but she embraced the improved energy, taking extra care with her appearance as she dressed for his visit. Mrs. Pendleton eyed her suspiciously at breakfast. "That young man," she began, passing the toast with pursed lips, "seems very devoted to you." "He is a good friend," Katherine replied carefully. Mrs. Pendleton sniffed. "In my day, good friends didn't ride 2 days without stopping just to check on a young lady's health." Her expression softened slightly. "Though I will say he seems a decent sort, respectful." "He is," Katherine agreed, hiding a smile at the older woman's grudging approval. Samuel arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, though nothing could disguise the essential ruggedness of his appearance. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. Mrs. Pendleton showed him to the parlor, where Katherine waited, seated on a small sofa. "1 hour," the landlady announced firmly before withdrawing, leaving the parlor door pointedly open. Samuel smiled as he sat beside Katherine, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Mrs. Pendleton is very protective of you," he observed. "She means well," Katherine replied, returning his smile. "What's that?" she asked, indicating the package. Samuel handed it to her. "From my father," he explained. "When I told him I was coming to see you, he insisted I bring his special herbs for the steam treatments. There's enough here for several weeks and instructions for making more." Katherine unwrapped the package to find several carefully labeled packets of dried herbs, along with a letter from Dr. Jenkins containing detailed instructions and concerned inquiries about her health. "This is so kind," she said, genuinely touched by the old doctor's thoughtfulness. "Please thank him for me when you return." Samuel's expression turned serious. "About that," he began, "I'm not planning to return to Willow Creek right away. I've taken rooms at the hotel for at least 2 weeks." "2 weeks?" Katherine echoed, surprised. "But your ranch, your horses." "My foreman can handle things," Samuel replied. "I've been training him to take more responsibility anyway." He paused. "The truth is, Katherine, I want to spend time with you. Real time, not just a rushed visit. I want to help you get stronger and—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "I want us to have a chance to know each other better, away from the trail and the emergency that brought us together." Katherine felt a flutter of something dangerously like hope in her chest. "I would like that too," she admitted. "But Samuel, you must understand my condition hasn't changed. The fundamental truth of my situation remains the same. I know, he said simply. And my feelings remain the same too. Over the following days, a routine developed that brought unexpected joy to Catherine's life. Samuel would arrive each morning, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers from the meadows outside town, a book of poetry he'd found at the general store, once even a small wooden horse he'd carved himself during the evening hours at his hotel. Mrs. Pendleton, initially suspicious, gradually warmed to Samuel's presence, especially after she witnessed him setting up a steam treatment for Catherine and saw how the procedure eased her breathing. By the end of the first week, the landlady had relaxed her chaperonage enough to allow them to sit together on the small porch behind the boarding house, where Catherine could enjoy the fresh air without being exposed to the dust of the main street. It was during one of these porch visits that Samuel first kissed her. They had been discussing a letter Catherine had received from one of her pupils, a bright 10-year-old girl who wrote with touching concern about her teacher's health and hopes for her return to the classroom. "You've made a real difference here," Samuel observed, watching Catherine's face as she refolded the letter. "Those children love you." Catherine smiled, a hint of sadness in her expression. "I've tried to be a good teacher. It matters to me that they remember me that way, not just as the teacher who got sick and disappeared." "Is that what you're worried about?" Samuel asked gently. Being forgotten, the question struck deeper than he could have known. Since her diagnosis, Catherine had indeed wrestled with the fear of leaving no lasting mark on the world, of slipping away without having truly mattered to anyone. "Perhaps," she admitted. "Isn't that what everyone fears in the end? That their life amounted to little, that they'll be quickly forgotten." Samuel shook his head, his expression earnest. "You won't be forgotten, Catherine. Not by your students, not by the people of this town who have come to respect you." He took her hand, his voice dropping lower. "And certainly not by me." Catherine looked up, meeting his intense blue gaze. "Samuel." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. It was brief, almost reverent, yet it conveyed a depth of feeling that took Catherine's breath away more effectively than any coughing spell. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, gauging her reaction. "I've wanted to do that since Willow Creek," he confessed, a slight flush coloring his weathered cheeks. Catherine raised a trembling hand to touch his face, the stubble rough against her palm. "I've wanted you to," she whispered. The admission changed something between them, a barrier falling away to reveal deeper possibilities. Catherine had held part of herself in reserve, afraid to fully embrace the feelings growing between them. Now, with the simple acknowledgement of mutual desire, she found herself unable to maintain that distance. As the days passed, Catherine's health showed small but noticeable improvements. The steam treatments combined with Dr. Jenkins' herbal tea and the simple joy of Samuel's presence seemed to grant her a reprieve from the worst of her symptoms. Though she still experienced coughing fits and fatigue, they were less severe, less frequent than before. Dr. Patterson, initially skeptical of the folk remedies Samuel had introduced, was forced to admit that Catherine seemed stronger. "I can't explain it scientifically," he told her during a checkup, "but whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Your lungs sound clearer than they have since you arrived in Silver Ridge." The 2 weeks Samuel had planned to stay extended to 3, then 4. He sent messages to his foreman in Willow Creek, arranged for additional care for his horses, and settled into a routine in Silver Ridge that centered around Catherine. They spent their days together, taking short walks when her strength permitted, reading to each other when it didn't, talking for hours about their lives, their hopes, the places they'd seen and the ones they'd dreamed of visiting. In the evenings, Samuel would return to his hotel, leaving Katherine to rest and reflect on the unexpected turn her life had taken. She knew they were living in a temporary bubble of happiness that could not last. Either her health would fail completely, or Samuel would eventually have to return to his ranch and his responsibilities in Willow Creek. Yet the knowledge of impermanence made each day more precious rather than less. Katherine found herself living with an intensity she had never experienced before, savoring each moment with Samuel, each conversation, each carefully chaste kiss exchanged under Mrs. Pendleton's increasingly indulgent supervision. It was during their 5th week together that Samuel raised the question Katherine had been both anticipating and dreading. They were sitting on their bench in the small park at the center of Silver Ridge, watching children play nearby. The summer day was warm but not uncomfortable, a light breeze carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. "Katherine," Samuel began, his voice more serious than usual, "I need to ask you something important." She turned to face him, noting the intensity in his expression. "What is it?" Samuel took both her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life," he said quietly. "Being with you, seeing you grow stronger, it's confirmed what I already knew in my heart." Katherine's pulse quickened, a mixture of anticipation and fear tightening her chest. "Samuel, please let me finish," he requested gently. "I know our situation isn't conventional. I know there are challenges ahead that most couples don't face. But Katherine, I love you. I want to marry you." Though she had suspected this was coming, the actual proposal still took her breath away. "Samuel, you can't. We can't." "We can," he insisted, his blue eyes earnest. "I've thought about this from every angle. I know what I'm asking, what I'm offering. I want to be your husband for whatever time we have, a year, 5 years, or 50. Katherine felt tears gathering in her eyes. "You deserve more than a dying wife," she whispered. "What I deserve is happiness," Samuel countered. "And you make me happy, Katherine. Even knowing what lies ahead, even with the uncertainty and the hard days that will come, being with you brings me more joy than I ever thought possible." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple band of gold with a modest pearl set at its center. "This was my mother's," he explained. "Pa gave it to me before I left, said he knew from my letters what you meant to me." Katherine stared at the ring, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "You told your father you intended to propose," Samuel smiled slightly. "He guessed. Said he recognized the symptoms from his own experience with my mother." His expression grew more serious. "He also said that love is always worth the risk, even when time is limited, that the depth of feeling matters more than its duration." The simple wisdom of Dr. Jenkins' words resonated with Katherine. Wasn't that what she herself had discovered these past weeks? That the quality of her days mattered more than their quantity. That the joy of loving and being loved by Samuel brought meaning to her life in a way that mere survival never could. "If I say yes," she said carefully, "you must promise me something, anything. Promise me you won't regret this choice, that when the end comes, you won't look back and wish you'd chosen differently." Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "I promise," he said firmly. "I will never regret loving you, Katherine, not for a single moment." Katherine took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a precipice. Fear whispered that she was being selfish, that accepting Samuel's proposal would only lead to his heartbreak. But love spoke louder, reminding her that the choice was his to make, that denying both of them happiness out of fear was its own form of selfishness. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strengthening as she continued. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Jenkins." The joy that transformed Samuel's face was answer enough to any lingering doubts. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her, heedless of the public setting. Katherine returned the kiss with equal fervor, tasting the salt of her own tears mingled with the sweetness of his lips. When they finally parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado territory," he murmured. Katherine smiled through her tears. "And I'm the happiest woman, despite everything." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Ridge. Reactions were mixed. Some, like Emily Warren, were genuinely delighted for Katherine, while others whispered that Samuel Jenkins must be after the schoolteacher's modest savings, or perhaps had proposed out of pity. Katherine found she cared little for the gossip. Her happiness was too profound to be diminished by wagging tongues, and Samuel's steadfast devotion was evident to anyone who truly looked. Mr. Hargrove, when informed that Katherine would not be returning to teach in the fall after all, was unexpectedly supportive of her new plans. "Marriage suits you, Miss Owens," he observed when she visited him to formally resign her position. "You look more alive than I've seen you since your arrival in Silver Ridge." The wedding was planned for early September, just 2 weeks after Samuel's proposal. There was no need for an extended engagement. Both wanted to begin their life together as soon as possible, acutely aware of the precious nature of their time. The question of where they would live after marriage was resolved more simply than Katherine had feared. Samuel, after several long conversations with his foreman via telegraph, announced that he had decided to sell his ranch in Willow Creek. "You can't," Katherine protested when he told her. "Your ranch is your life's work, your dream." Samuel shook his head, taking her hands in his. "You're my dream now," he said simply. "Besides, I've been thinking about a change for some time. The foreman, Tom, has wanted to buy the place for years. He'll take good care of it, continue the breeding program we've built." "But what will you do?" Katherine asked, concerned. "Where will we live?" Samuel smiled, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "I've been looking at land outside Silver Ridge," he admitted. "There's a small property about 3 miles from town, 20 acres, a decent cabin, good water access, perfect for a new start." The property he described was indeed perfect, a sheltered valley with southern exposure, protected from the worst of the mountain winds by a ridge of pine-covered hills. The cabin was small but solid, with a stone fireplace and 2 rooms that could easily be expanded later if needed. Later. The word hung unspoken between them, laden with hope neither dared voice aloud. What if there was a later? What if the improvements in Katherine's health continued? Dr. Patterson, while still cautious in his prognosis, had noted with surprise that her lungs showed signs of healing rather than deterioration. "It happens occasionally," he told them during Katherine's most recent examination. "Rare cases where the disease seems to go dormant. I can't explain it, and I don't want to raise false hopes, but—" He shrugged, his scientific skepticism at war with the evidence before him. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the first hint of fall. The ceremony was held in Silver Ridge's small church, attended by those who had become friends during Katherine's time in town: the Warrens, Mr. Hargrove and his wife, several of Katherine's former pupils and their families, even Mrs. Pendleton, who had gradually transformed from strict landlady to something approaching a maternal figure. Dr. Jenkins had traveled from Willow Creek for the occasion, his gruff exterior softening when he saw his son waiting at the altar for his bride. Katherine, walking alone down the aisle in a simple cream-colored dress, felt her heart swell with emotion at the sight of Samuel's face as he watched her approach love, pride, and something like wonder illuminating his features. The ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful. When Samuel repeated the traditional vow in sickness and in health, "Till death do us part," his voice held no reservation, only steadfast commitment. Catherine's response was equally firm, her voice stronger than it had been in months. The small reception afterward, held in the hotel dining room, was a joyful celebration despite the shadow that still hung over the couple's future. Katherine found herself laughing more than she had in years, surrounded by well-wishers and buoyed by Samuel's constant, loving presence at her side. As the afternoon waned, Samuel helped his new wife into the wagon he had purchased for their journey to their new home. Rice and flower petals showered down upon them as they departed Silver Ridge, both smiling and waving to the friends who had gathered to see them off. The 3-mile journey to their new property passed quickly. Katherine nestled against Samuel's side on the wagon seat, his arm secure around her waist. As they crested the final rise and their new home came into view in the valley below, Samuel drew the horses to a halt. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jenkins," he said softly, using her new name for the first time. Katherine leaned against him, taking in the sight of the small cabin, the meadow surrounding it golden in the late afternoon light, the mountains rising majestically in the background. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Perfect." Samuel kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her. "Our fresh start," he murmured. "Together." As they continued down the slope toward their new home, Katherine felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever the future held, whether days or years, she would face it with Samuel by her side. The man who had once promised to be her breath when she couldn't breathe had become so much more. Her companion, her husband, her love, and perhaps, just perhaps, her miracle. The first year of marriage passed more quickly than either Katherine or Samuel could have imagined. Their small cabin gradually transformed into a true home under their combined efforts, Samuel expanding the structure to add a larger bedroom and a covered porch, Katherine creating a garden that provided vegetables for their table and flowers for their souls. Katherine's health, rather than declining as both had privately feared, continued its unexpected improvement. The steam treatments and herbal remedies from Dr. Jenkins remained part of her daily routine, but the severe coughing spells became less frequent, the fatigue less debilitating. By the following spring, she was strong enough to ride into Silver Ridge regularly, reconnecting with friends and occasionally substituting at the school when the new teacher needed assistance. Samuel began breeding horses again, on a smaller scale than his operation in Willow Creek, but with the same dedication to quality. His reputation as a breeder of exceptional mounts spread quickly, bringing buyers from as far away as Denver to their small ranch. Their life together settled into a rhythm of shared work, and simple pleasures, meals prepared and eaten together. Evenings spent reading by the fire or sitting on their porch watching the sunset. Nights of tender intimacy that deepened their connection with each passing month. On their first anniversary, Samuel presented Katherine with a journal bound in soft leather. "For your thoughts," he explained as she ran her fingers over the cover. "For your stories, for whatever you want to preserve." Katherine began writing that very night, recording not only current events but memories of their journey together, the unusual beginnings of their love story. The journal became a daily practice, a way of marking time and appreciating the gift of each day they shared. Dr. Patterson, who examined Katherine every few months, remained cautiously optimistic about her condition. "I wouldn't go so far as to call it a recovery," he told them during a check-up near the end of their first year of marriage. "But it's certainly a remission more significant than any I've witnessed in my career." Katherine accepted his assessment with quiet gratitude, neither denying the severity of her illness nor allowing it to define her existence. She had learned to live with uncertainty, to embrace each day without constantly looking ahead to shadows that might never materialize. As their second year of marriage began, Katherine made a discovery that transformed their lives once again. After several weeks of unusual fatigue and morning sickness, she consulted Dr. Patterson, who confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was with child. The news brought both joy and trepidation. Pregnancy was risky for any woman in the frontier, but for someone with Katherine's health history, the dangers were magnified. Dr. Patterson was frank in his concerns. "Your body will be under tremendous strain," he warned. "The pregnancy could reactivate the consumption, reverse all the progress you've made." Katherine listened to his cautions with appropriate gravity, but felt an overwhelming certainty that this child was meant to be. When she told Samuel that evening, his initial shock gave way to a complex mixture of emotions: elation, fear, and a fierce protectiveness that manifested in his immediate insistence on reducing her workload around their home. "You need to rest," he declared, his tone brooking no argument. "No more heavy garden work, no more helping with the horses. I'll hire someone from town if necessary." Katherine placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Samuel," she said quietly, "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Dr. Patterson said moderate activity is good for me as long as I don't exhaust myself." Samuel's expression softened, though concern still shadowed his blue eyes. "I can't lose you," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Not when we've come so far, not when we've had so much more time than we dared hope for." Katherine stood on tiptoe to kiss him gently. "You won't lose me," she promised, though they both knew it wasn't entirely hers to promise. "We'll be careful, follow the doctor's advice. But Samuel, this baby, it's our miracle, a part of both of us that will live on no matter what happens to me." The months of pregnancy passed with agonizing slowness for Samuel, who watched Katherine's changing body with a mixture of wonder and fear. For Katherine herself, the experience was one of profound connection to the life growing within her, to the husband who hovered protectively at her side, to the future that suddenly seemed to stretch before them with new possibility. Dr. Patterson monitored her closely, as did Dr. Jenkins, who made the journey from Willow Creek several times during her pregnancy, bringing new herbal preparations specifically formulated for her condition. To everyone's cautious amazement, Katherine's lungs remained stable, her overall health good despite the increasing demands on her body. Their son was born on a crisp autumn day in their third year of marriage, arriving after a labor that tested Katherine's endurance but ultimately ended in triumph, rather than tragedy. Samuel, who had refused to leave her side despite the midwife's initial objections, wept unashamedly when the baby was placed in Katherine's arms. "He's perfect," Katherine whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the shock of dark hair that clearly came from his father. "Our James Edward Jenkins." The name honored both their fathers, Katherine's long-deceased parent and Samuel's father, who arrived 2 weeks after the birth to meet his first grandchild. Dr. Jenkins, examining both mother and child with professional thoroughness and grandfatherly tenderness, pronounced them both in excellent health. "Never thought I'd see the day," he admitted to Samuel as they stood on the porch, giving Katherine privacy to nurse the baby. "When you first brought her to my office, barely breathing, I thought you were setting yourself up for heartbreak, son." Samuel watched a hawk circling lazily overhead, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe I was," he acknowledged, "but some things are worth the risk of heartbreak, Doctor." Jenkins clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of the man you've become." he said gruffly. "As am I." Life with a newborn brought new challenges and deeper joys to their small household. Katherine discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, managing the demands of motherhood while continuing the treatments that kept her illness at bay. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, as comfortable cradling his son as he was breaking a wild horse. By James's first birthday, the small cabin had been expanded again to include a nursery, and Katherine had begun tentative plans to establish a small school on their property for the children of neighboring ranchers and miners. Her occasional substitute teaching in Silver Ridge had reawakened her passion for education, and Samuel encouraged her to pursue the idea as her health permitted. "You were born to teach," he told her one evening as they watched James taking his first uncertain steps across the cabin floor. "It's part of who you are, and our neighbors' children deserve better than a 3-mile trek to town each day." The school began the following spring with 6 pupils ranging in age from 5 to 12, meeting 3 days a week in a converted outbuilding near the main house. Katherine thrived in her return to teaching, while still having ample time for her family and the rest she still required to maintain her health. As their 5th wedding anniversary approached, Katherine sat on their porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. James, now a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful expression, played nearby with wooden horses Samuel had carved for him. Samuel joined her, settling into the chair beside hers, their hands automatically reaching for each other in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, savoring the peaceful end to a productive day. "Do you ever think about that night in Willow Creek?" Katherine asked suddenly. "When we first met," Samuel's thumb traced familiar patterns on her palm. "Often," he admitted, "especially when I wake in the night and hear you breathing beside me. It reminds me how close I came to never knowing you, to never having all this." He gestured with his free hand, encompassing their home, their son, the life they had built together. Katherine smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I thought I was dying," she remembered. "That night when you found me outside the inn. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see. Everything was going dark. You scared 10 years off my life," Samuel acknowledged, his arms slipping around her shoulders to draw her closer. "And then you said it," Katherine continued softly. "Then I'll be your breath. You remember," Samuel nodded, his cheek resting against her hair. "Meant it too, though I had no idea then what it would lead to." Katherine turned to look up at him, her eyes shining in the fading light. "You have been, you know, my breath, my strength. My reason to fight when it would have been easier to give up." Samuel kissed her gently, his lips lingering on hers in a familiar gesture that still held the power to quicken her pulse. "You've been mine too," he murmured, "in ways I never knew I needed." James toddled over to them, demanding to be included in the embrace. Samuel lifted him onto his lap, and Katherine's arm encircled them both, completing the family circle. As twilight deepened around them, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The consumption that had once threatened to claim her life still lurked within her lungs, a shadow that would never fully disappear, according to Dr. Patterson. But it had retreated, gone dormant in a remission so prolonged that the doctor now spoke cautiously of potential years rather than months. Whether it was the mountain air, the treatments, or simply the power of love and purpose in her life, Katherine couldn't say for certain. Perhaps it was all of these things together, or perhaps it was the promise made by a stranger on a dark night when she thought her life was ending, the promise that had instead become the beginning of everything. Then, "I'll be your breath," and he had been, he still was, every day.